Hi, this is Jennifer Rubin, and this is Jen Rubin's Green Room. Welcome to the show, and thanks so much for coming back. Remember, click here so you can subscribe, tell your friends, and please let me hear from you. I want to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts during a crazy time in our politics. Let's start with the Republican National Convention. I thought the coverage was absurd. Talking about unity, talking about a, quote, successful convention, when you're covering a really deranged, authoritarian, cult-like movement is just inappropriate and, frankly, imagines what the press's role is. It's not to cheerlead. It's not to give style points. It's supposed to be there to accurately describe what is going on, and more important, to inform Americans about the threat to their democracy. And suddenly they've all become entranced with what was it supposed to be? The new and transformed Trump? A kinder, subtler, more thoughtful Trump. That's what we were told? Nonsense. First of all, remember the parade of criminals? The notion that this party should talk about a crime wave when you had one convict after another coming up to the stage is really a little bit too much to bear. And the notion of unity? I didn't see Mike Pence there. You remember, the former vice president who this former president tried to, frankly, sick the mob on? No, this was not an exercise in unity. This was an exercise in cult dramatics. This was what fascist leaders do. They intoxicate their audiences with emotion, with grievance, with anger, and they abandon any notion of governance, of helping their fellow man. This is about them. This is about them venting their spleen. And this is about empowering someone who thinks that he is now ordained by God. So if he was dangerous before, just think about what he's going to be like now that he thinks he's on a mission from God. The speech itself was something you'd expect from, Fidel Castro. How these totalitarian leaders around the world operate. They give these long speeches, 3 hours, 5 hours, because you're all supposed to sit there and just have their words wash over you. Well, it wasn't 3 hours, but it was 90 minutes. And it was really the worst acceptance speech in the history of acceptance speeches, let alone in the history of convention speeches. He began with his story of his assassination attempt, which, again, reprehensible, horrible. He trotted out a prop of the deceased fireman, which was obviously a prop since it had his name misspelled. Talk about manipulating people, using people for your own disgusting political ends. And then it launched into what was a typical Trump speech. Of course he hasn't changed. He's a malignant narcissist. He's incapable of changing. He's incapable of becoming a serious person. He mocked Paul Pelosi. He again raised the specter of hordes of criminal immigrants coming across our border. He again is caught up in this loop of power, revenge, resentment. And what does the media do? They don't evaluate that. They don't put that in context and say, this is a dangerous departure from the way American democracy is supposed to work. And instead, they give him brownie points for, having a unified convention. It's such a successful convention, they say. Well, if it's a successful convention, then our democracy is in for a heap of trouble. Now, for me, the convention also underscored a very undesirable but self-evident point. Virtually any Democrat should be beating the pants off this guy. But Democrats are absorbed in their own drama because President Biden, his age, his performance, his inability to articulate a sharp message against Trump has made it impossible to make the election solely about Trump, which is how Democrats are going to win. Instead, it's all about Biden. Have you heard anything, despite that Looney Tunes speech, about Trump's emotional and mental state? No, because all the oxygen is taken up talking about Biden's shortcomings, Biden's age, Biden's lack of verbal acuity. And by the way, they're right. He is old. He has lost verbal acuity, and he is not making the kind of presentation Democrats will need to beat Donald Trump. But it's the disparity in coverage that should concern all of us. Remember when the press used to insist they were all about balance? Well, frankly, we could use a little balance because right now they've become a cheering section for Donald Trump. Now, what about President Biden? We can bemoan the fact that the press has behaved like a pack of sharks with blood in the water. They have circled Biden. They have engaged in advocacy journalism. They have absolutely flooded the zone. And we can acknowledge that that is disproportionate, that that is unbalanced, that's unfair. But you also have to recognize a reality. Now the election has become about him. And he is not an effective messenger for the Democratic Party. And although he is very capable of governing for the remaining 6 months and has had a very successful presidency, that doesn't mean he can conduct a compelling campaign or that he could make it through the next 4 years. That's not just Jen Rubin saying it. And it is not, as some members of the Democratic Party have said, just about a bunch of white elites and donors. You have members of the Black Caucus. You have members of the Hispanic Caucus. You have a variety of lawmakers on the Democratic side from all sorts of districts, safe districts, not safe districts, an overwhelming number of senators, an overwhelming number of House members. You have the minority leader of the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries. They all have eyes to see. They are not, like their Republican counterparts, members of a cult. They are capable of independent judgment and assessment. Now, is it a risk to dump the top of your ticket, the incumbent president, at this late date? Of course it is. It would be foolhardy to make this decision without evidence, without acknowledging that Biden should be given some time to improve. That's what I've been arguing about, that the day after the debate was no time to make the decision, that he should be afforded an opportunity to demonstrate how robust he is, how forceful he can be, how effective he can be, to show that whatever little blip in the polls had washed out. But he has not done those things. And he has less support among elected Democrats today than he arguably did a week or 2 weeks ago. So what happens next? Well, there is a process, and I think President Biden is finally seriously considering leaving the race. Now, does that mean he certainly may do so? No. Does it mean he certainly will stay? No. It means, I believe, for the first time, he is fairly reasonably considering his options. Until now, I think he has lived in a bubble, supported and frankly, really shielded from reality by a very close group of advisors and by his family. However noble you think that is, however loyal you may think those people are, they have done him a grave misservice, a great disservice, and the country as well. In not leveling with him, in not coming to him perhaps months ago, let alone weeks ago, to tell him, Mr. President, you have been a heroic figure, but this is not going to work. Instead, by humoring him, shielding him, exposing to him as few interviews as possible up until the debate, and even since then, very, very few, they have allowed him to get the idea that this was feasible, that he could still do this. And I think what we have learned, what I have seen over the last few weeks, is that he cannot. I cannot guarantee, no one can guarantee, that another candidate at the top of the ticket will win. But what I can say is the current situation with President Biden is untenable. He cannot win. You can blame the press, you can blame his advisors, but ultimately you look at this man and you say, can he bring the message, defend democracy at a critical point in our history? And I come to the very sad realization the answer is no. And I say that as someone who has been very positive about the president, who has lauded his considerable achievements, who has praised his domestic policy, who has admired his foreign policy, who believes he is a decent, honorable, compassionate man. But we also face an inflection point. The question is not preserving Joe Biden's legacy. The question is preserving America. And for that, you have to at least give an effort to bring in someone who has a shot at winning this. Now, there is a second conversation going on, which is, well, if he does step aside, should he make way for Kamala Harris, his devoted, eloquent, energetic, loyal vice president? Or should he invite the convention to spin the wheel and choose some random white guy who most of the country has never heard of, who has not been vetted, who may not have any foreign policy experience? Well, you can tell which side I favor. I think it's absurd. It's insulting to think that someone else could be brought in at the last moment, someone with no connection to the campaign, no connection to the apparatus, who has had none of the advantages that she has, who has had none of the experience on the international stage, and who would replace the first African-American, first Asian-American female vice president. It's absurd. And the people who are raising this prospect are either doing it maliciously in order to keep Biden where he is, or they are making it much more difficult to get rid of Biden because they hold out the specter of chaos, of confusion, of even missing deadlines on the ballot registration in various states. I would disregard them. I think we are down to a simple equation. Is the Democratic Party and is democracy better going forward with Biden, or is it better going forward with Kamala Harris? I come to the conclusion that it is Kamala Harris. And by the way, I'm not disparaging Democrats who think the opposite. I'm not disparaging their view that the press has been hugely irresponsible. I'm simply reaching a conclusion that I think is supported by the overwhelming weight of evidence. And the vast majority of Democrats, if you look at the polls, think they should have somebody else as their candidate. Will that happen? Will that happen quickly? I don't know. But I will say this. The same people who have been shielding Biden, who have been protecting him, who have been lofting and furthering the notion that he is a fully capable, dynamic candidate who can take it to Trump, those people now have a special responsibility to atone for their bad behavior, to be candid with him, to help him make this decision and make it quickly so that the party and the country can go on. And I think when they look back on this, they're going to have to answer to their children, to their grandchildren, did we do the right thing by America at a critical point of time? Or was I too much of a careerist, too much of a toady, too much of an insider to actually level with the President of the United States? I hope they can move forward with a clear conscience, knowing that in the end, for whatever their failings, and none of us are perfect, that they ultimately helped President Biden reach the right decision and give us a fighting chance to defend our democracy. Because if not, we're in for a world of trouble. I was actually paging through, not page by page, but maybe chapter heading by chapter heading through the 2025 project. It is frightful. We're talking about getting rid of the Federal Reserve. We're talking about eliminating 50,000 or so neutral experts and putting in flunkies that take an oath of office to Donald Trump. We're talking about rounding up 11, 12 million Americans who we think are undocumented, putting them in camps and then deporting them. This is madness. And this is a recipe for economic chaos. If you think the economy is a little bit tenuous now, wait until we get rid of the Federal Reserve and slap 100% tariffs on foreign goods. Watch the economy sink when that comes into being. And it is also a recipe for the Christianization of America. It is really a vile document in that it talks about the sanctity of a male-headed nuclear family a wife, a father, a husband, and the kids. That's fine if that's the kind of family you want. But it explicitly says that that is the only type of family that we should recognize. It wants to excise words like gender, abortion from all laws and regulations. That's just delusional. They think they're going to wish people out of existence. They think they're going to wish issues and people's identity out of existence. Apparently so. They see the United States government as an institute of theocratic control. They want to impose their views on you and me and everyone, whether it's about prayer in school, whether it's about outlawing the Christone, whether it's about discriminating against LGBTQ plus citizens. It is frightful, and it is a recipe for an un-American, authoritarian future. So here we are. On one hand, a deranged candidate heading a movement of frightful proportions that seeks to redefine America and redefine who is an American. And on the other side, a party struggling to reach the right decision, struggling to come up with a decision that can give us all a fighting chance for democracy. Well, you might ask, what do I do as they work this thing out on the Democratic side? I would say, let everyone you know all about Project 2025. Explain to them that this is a fight against totalitarianism, against a vision of America that is made for, dominated by white Christian males. Make the case that this is about beginning to rein in a rogue Supreme Court that has empowered the president to commit crimes, that this is about reforming a court so it doesn't continue to rip out precedent and aggregate power to itself. Make this about democracy, whoever is atop the ticket. Make this about the fight to prevent the authoritarian decline of the United States. And if you do that, you will be able to tell your kids and grandkids that when America called, you did everything you could to protect it. That's all we have for today. See you next time. Bye-bye.